We're ready to go. Who all is here? Oh, we got some folks in the chat. So let us begin. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. The little thing down there on the bottom is saying today's guest is the Button Lady. As you can clearly see, she is not here this week. I am here by myself. I am Sarumann, your host, aka Josh. And as you probably saw from the title card here, we are talking the Silmarillion, as we have been for the last few weeks. We've been going through this chapter by chapter, and most of the folks from the One Ring are right now down in Anaheim for WonderCon, and I'm up here in LA doing this. No, Suzanne isn't here. We're not going to have the fun dolls this time, but I am going to have lots of other visual aids for you because this week we're going to be talking about a chapter that I think a lot of people see this chapter as the one that sort of gives, or one of the chapters that gives the book it's a unfortunate reputation, and I would say ill-suited reputation for being dry, ponderous, maybe a little boring, because this is a chapter that talks a lot about geography and a lot about lineages. This is chapter 5 of the Quintus Silmarillion, entitled "Of Eldamar and the Princes of the Eldalië." Suzanne says is in the chat, but it's okay that you're not here because this is I've planned this whole thing out. I've been working all week on researching this chapter, all the different lines of elves, all the different types of elves there are, the journey that they take, what it all means, and tried to create a presentation of sorts for you, which is it's a bit more like a more like a classroom lecture. I'm going to have a type of a whiteboard that we'll be using to illustrate a lot of these points, because I think visual aids are really going to help with this. And this is all set up. It's all set up for the next chapter, which begins the really big story, which Suzanne has already demanded that she be here for. And we'll be starting that in 2 weeks on the 19th. Next week, we'll be taking a little break from the Silmarillion to discuss our book of the month, Middle-earth Madness, with a few of the contributors joining us. I pushed it back a week because, of course, today is Easter, and happy Easter to all of you. So there are people who are celebrating Easter and, of course, can't make it, and also a number of our staffers are down at WonderCon right now, so they can't make it either. So I thought, okay, we'll take this time to lay the groundwork for the big Feanor story. So we'll begin that shortly. Oh yeah. So we're gonna start this off. Temple is asking, can you tell us what the new book for this month is so we can get started? There actually is not going to be a book for this month because we're focusing so much on the Silmarillion, and I found it's very hard for me to personally be researching and going through the Silmarillion with a fine-tooth comb while reading another book at the same time. So there won't be a book of the month for April. Instead, we'll be focusing on the Silmarillion. And we may have another book in May, we'll see, or we may just stick with the Silmarillion. So don't worry, the reading for this weekend, for this month, is just the Silmarillion. So I'm going to switch things over here. There's going to be a lot of information so I'm actually going to get rid of the chat window. I'll still see it on my end, but you won't be seeing it up here on the screen. So since this is more classroom lecture style, I would ask if you are so inclined, take notes, and any questions you have, save them for the end, and we'll go over them then. So it'll be like, actually, it'll be more like in the style of one of our torn panels that we've done at conventions, where we give you lots of information and then we take questions at the end. So that's how this is going to run. So let us begin. Let me bring up the whiteboard here. There we go. And you can see me. And you see I've gotten rid of all the books and everything, or I've gotten rid of all the various chat windows and other on-screen stuff. So I stole the One Ring is saying, setting my brain for explosion. So let us begin by briefly going over what happened. Where is it? What happened? Nope, wrong one. There we go. Previously. So, what we discussed last time, we're just going to go over this very briefly. We'll start with our good old buddy Melkor, who has returned to Middle-earth after having been expelled by the Valar, and he has smashed down their great lamps that have been lighting the world, cast the entire world in darkness, and split the land into two big continents. You have, wait, this is opposite. You have Middle-earth on this side, and the continent of Aman on this side. And the Valar have retreated back to the continent of Aman and set up their home of Valinor there, while Melkor runs rampant across Middle-earth. And his stronghold is up here in Utumno, which is way up in the north and is all sorts of dark. And the Valar are just sort of biding their time, waiting for the arrival of the children of Iluvatar, the elves. The Valar don't know where they are. They know they're coming. The land is covered in darkness, and two Valar, Orome and Yavanna, have been trying to persuade the Valar to get rid of Melkor so that they can pave the way for the elves to join the world. But Manwë, the king of the Valar, has said, no, we can't do that because according to the vision of Ea that was given to us by Iluvatar, the children will be born, will awaken darkness. So his wife Vanna has gone and created tons and tons of stars to help make the whole world a little bit brighter for them when they do wake up. And so then we have Orome, who is the rider. He is constantly riding through Middle-earth, hunting down Melkor's minions and trying to find the children of Iluvatar whenever they show up. And as luck would have it, they do indeed show up. And what is this next one here? And so Orome finds them and runs back to Valinor and tells the Valar, okay, we found the children of Iluvatar. They're awake. Can we please take care of Melkor now? At which point, Tulkas, fighting across the world, Tulkas, he chimes in and says, yes, now is the time. Let's do this. So finally the Valar agree to go to Middle-earth, take care of Melkor, and they chain him up. Or I should say Tulkas chains him up, and there's an illustration there. Let me get rid of me for a second. And there's there's Melkor. He's all chained up now in Valinor. They have a huge big battle. They defeat him, drag him back to Valinor in chains, and jail him in the halls of Mandos for 3 ages. Then the Valar get back to talking about, well, what are we going to do about the elves? And this is where things get a little more dicey, because up to this point, the Valar have really taken their marching orders from Manwë, who is their king, and he's been taking his marching orders from Ilúvatar. He consults the music of the Ainur, he consults the vision of Ea, and he consults Ilúvatar himself to figure out what the next step should be. But when it comes to the elves, he's not getting a whole lot of feedback, because the elves are not the Valars to control. So the Valar end up going into a pretty big debate over what they should do with the elves. Should they leave them to their own devices in Middle-earth, or should they take them to Valinor, where they set up the trees of the Valar and where there is actually light in the world? And one of the Valar, Ulmo, he is pretty dead set against bringing them to Valinor. He believes that the elves should be left to their own devices because they are not the Valars to control. And finally, Manwë decides, nope, we are actually going to bring them to Valinor and keep them safe. So they agree to do that, and Orome goes back to where the elves are in a harbor called Cuiviénen, and tells them, we want to take you to Valinor, and the elves are not really all that into it, because Melkor had gotten to them first and made them very scared of leaving their territory by kidnapping those who do, and taking them to Utumno and turning them into orcs. And so Orome says, okay, very well. I'll take 3 ambassadors, and I'll take them to Valinor. I'll show them how great it is, and then they can come back and they can persuade you, and it'll be up to you whether or not you want to come to Valinor. And so Orome does that. The 3 ambassadors come back, and they start telling all the tales of the light of Aman that is greater than any light in the world, because you have to keep in mind that right now, where the elves live in Middle-earth, even though there's starlight everywhere, they still live in perpetual night. And so there are good things to be had in Valinor: light, protection, a good life, and there are lots of elves are willing to go, but there are some who are like, you know what, I'm actually okay right here. And so that brings us to what Tolkien calls the first, what happened here? The first great sundering of the elves. Let's just clear this up a little bit. There we go. Now, when Tolkien calls them sunderings, it's not just It's not just like 2 groups form out of one. It's more. It's a deeper meaning than that, because not only are they split into 2 groups, but both groups go their own separate ways and take their own separate paths. And what we have here are the first big split among the elves. And it's basically divided into the 2 groups. It's basically divided into those who go to Valinor and those who stay. And those who go to Valinor are called the Calaquendi, the Elves of Light. And those who stay They have lots of different names, the Avari, the Unwilling, but they all fall under one big umbrella called the Morroquendi, the Elves of Darkness. Let me get rid of me there for a second. And so these are the two big splits. Now, the Morroquendi don't figure too much into the story going forward, but they do show up here and there throughout. We focus primarily on, of course, the Calaquendi, the Elves of Light, the ones who go to Valinor. And that's where we kind of left off. So let's move on to the next bit here. Well, there is a little bit more, which we'll get into, and we'll go back to the three ambassadors who went to Valinor and then came back and told all the elves all the great things that are in Valinor and convinced them to leave. And these three ambassadors became the first three elven kings. We three elven kings. And here are their names and images to go with them. We have the first one, Ingwe. Then we have Finwë. And then we have Elwë. And Elwë will later become King Thingol. Elwë has another name, Singolo, which means gray mantle, and that turns into his name Thingol later on. Later the king says, so it's not that they're dark by nature, they just chose to live in a dark land with no... Yes, okay, I'm not going to get distracted by the chat, we're going to keep going here. So these three kings, they are the leaders of three different hosts of elves. And they all leave at different times, but they're their kings and their leaders. And so Ingwe is the leader of the host called the Vanyar. And the Vanyar, they're the first to leave. They're more into Valinor than anybody else. They go to Valinor and they pretty much stay. They rarely, if ever, leave. And so they don't really figure too much into the story going forward. And then we have the host that's led by Finwë, the Noldor. And these are very important characters. They're the ones who are going to figure the most prominently in the story going forward, and we'll get into that later when we get into their lineages and the different names, which there are many, and a lot of them will be names you'll need to know later on. And then Elwë is the leader of the largest group, the Teleri. And in fact, they're so big, his brother Olwë helps him out. And the Teleri, while the Vanyar and the Noldor, they go from Cuiviénen to Valinor, no real problem. The Teleri, on the other hand, they leave later than everybody else, and they're also much larger, and they're also more nervous about going across the world. So they tend to split off into different groups as they go along in what is called the Westward March, or the Great March. So we'll start with the Teleri, and where they all sort of break apart in the next bit of the Western March. Now, as you can see here, this is the big map of what Middle-earth looks like right now, or I should say Arda, because this is both Middle-earth and Valinor. Now, where is that guy? Here he is. Got a handy little guy here. So the elves are up here. Now, Orome's original idea was to take them from where they are around here in Cuiviénen up across this path here down into Valinor because it's actually connected by a little bit of a land bridge. The problem is, up here is Utumno. Everything is still very dark. There's still minions of Melkor hanging out there doing bad things. And also the land bridge here is made up primarily of ice, and it's very treacherous. And so while Orome has no trouble going over that day in, day out, he's more worried that the elves may not fare so well. So instead, he decides to take them through this land here called Eriador into another area called Beleriand, and then join up with Ulmo, who is now on board with bringing the elves to Valinor because it's been decided, and Ulmo will help them cross the sea to Valinor. So that's the westward march, or the overview of it. Now we're going to get into the specifics of it. So here we go with a nice big, more detailed map of Middle-earth. Where is that guy? There he is. So we'll start with where now the Vanyar and the Noldor, they go across no problem. We'll start here with the elves up here in Cuiviénen. And they go down through here, cross through the forest, over the river Anduin, through the Misty Mountains, through Eriador, through the Blue Mountains, through Beleriand into the forest of Nan Elmoth, and then they take the river Sirion down here to the Bay of Belar. And there is when Ulmo steps in. And he actually uproots an entire island, brings it to the Bay of Belar, has all the elves load up on it, or I should say the Vanyar and the Noldor. They load up on it because the Teleri are still hanging back here. We'll get into that in a second. And so the Vanyar and the Noldor load up onto the island, and the island takes them all the way across the sea. Here's the bay here, all the way across the sea to Valinor, to this area here, which we'll get into in a bit. So that's the overall path for the westward journey. So the Teleri, they hang back a little bit more because there's so many of them, and also they're very nervous. So Orome leading them, he's a lot like Gandalf in The Hobbit, where he'll lead them, but every now and then he takes off to go do something else. And whenever Orome does that, the Teleri just kind of stop dead in their tracks because they're so worried about what's going to be over the next bend. So they get down here to the river Anduin, and that's kind of where they stop for a bit because they see across the river the Misty Mountains. Now the Misty Mountains were originally created by Melkor. They were actually large, forbidding, craggy mountains that were set up by Melkor specifically to hinder Orome. But Orome has found paths through it, and he's gone off to help lead the Vanyar and the Noldor. And so the Teleri are sitting there at the Anduin, too nervous to cross the Misty Mountains, and not really willing to go back. And so we enter into... Where is he? Yes. So then enters another member of the Teleri group named Linwë. And Linwë, he decides, you know what? I'm good here. I think I'll set up here. And he takes a bunch of the Teleri with them, and they decide to travel down the Anduin, down the Anduin into my face, no, into the forest areas and live out their lives there rather than continuing on the journey to Valinor. And those elves are called the Nandor, or the the Wood Elves. And they're going to figure into the story later on, and they actually get split up a bit more, but that's later on in the story, so we're not going to worry about that. But that's another sundering. The Nandor decide to stay there when Orome finally comes back and continues to lead them on through the Misty Mountains, through Eriador, over the Blue Mountains, and into Beleriand. And then it's here in the forest of Nan Elmoth that we have what we talked about last week. Elwë goes into the forest and meets the Maya Melian. And from there, they become enamored with each other. They touch and fall into a trance-like state for years. And a lot of the Teleri, who are very loyal to Elwë, want to stay and try to find him. But eventually his brother always says, nope, we need to keep going. We need to keep going and get to Valinor. So then we have another sundering, and those elves there who stay in Nan Elmoth waiting for Elwë to emerge or to find him, they go by a number of different names, primarily calling themselves the Forsaken because they're left behind. But eventually, once Elwë returns and becomes King Thingol, they finally settle on the name Sindar. And that becomes the name of that group, and they reside in that forest, which becomes the kingdom of Doriath. And so now we have two groups of elves that have broken off from the main group of the Teleri. So the Teleri keep going down the river Sirion to the Bay of Belar, where they have missed the boat. Ulmo has taken the island with the Vanyar and the Noldor, taken them to Valinor, and the Teleri are basically stuck. And so from here, they become friends with Osse, who is the Maya who works for Ulmo. And Osse just loves these guys, and he wants to teach them everything about the sea. And they become completely enamored with it. And so they learn mostly like sea songs, sea craft. They don't learn shipbuilding just yet. Osse is kind of keeping that from them. But eventually, Ulmo finally decides, okay, I'll uproot the island again, bring it back to the Bay of Valar, and take the Teleri back to Valinor finally. Mostly because Finwë really wants them there. He's very good friends with Elwë, and he wants to be reunited with him. He doesn't know that Elwë is not part of the group that will be arriving in Valinor, but he's the one who finally convinces Ulmo to uproot the island, go back to Valar, take the Teleri, and take them to Valinor. And then we have another sundering here, because Osse has really fallen in love with the Teleri, and he wants them to stay. He wants them to stay here in the Bay of Valar. And he convinces a number of them to do just that, and that's where they become master shipbuilders under the teaching of Osse, and they are called the Falathrim. And they are best known. They will figure more prominently in the later part of the story, with their master Círdan the shipwright. And so we have three different sunderings of the Teleri so far. Now, all that's left of the Teleri that get onto the island, they head over to Valinor, which takes us to the journey across the sea, which is fairly uneventful until they get into the bay. Now, we'll get rid of this little... Pardon me a second. Okay, we'll get rid of this map, and we'll bring up a zoomed-in map here. So, what we have here is this bay where they arrive, and that's called Eldamar, or Elven Home, which is the arrival point for the elves. Now, the Valar have done a little something to help greet the elves and help make them feel at home. We have the Pelori Mountains, which are the big wall that surround everything. They actually create a pass inside the Pelori that lets the light of Aman shine out to sort of entice them into coming in. And this is called the Pass of Light, or the Kalakiria. And inside there, they set up a hill called Tuna. And on that hill, the elves build their home, their capital city of, where is it? They build their capital city of Tirion, which looks a bit like this. So, I don't know if you can see it on screen, but Tirion is somewhere around here. And I wanted to kind of make a fun Photoshop of the expression that Tolkien uses a lot in this chapter, Tirion upon Tuna. For those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, you can probably think of some fun visual gags with something like that. I didn't have time to do that because I was busy putting this whole thing together. But Suzanne, if you're probably still in the chat, try to figure out how to do a Photoshop of Tirion sitting on a pile of tuna fish. Yes. And then we'll have Tirion upon Tuna. So the capital city, the Elves' capital city of Tirion, is where the Vanyar and the Noldor have pretty much set up their homes. Now, eventually, the Vanyar, who are just completely in love with the Valar, which is why they never leave, they eventually leave Tirion and go to the Valar city of Valmar, which is up here, in order to be closer to the Valar themselves. And so the Noldor pretty much take up residence in Tirion and become the rulers of that land under King Finwë. And then the Teleri arrive, and they come on the island, but once they get here, they see the Kalakiria, and they decide, and they're also still hearing the calls of Osse behind them, and so they don't really want to complete the journey, even though they're right there. They're like, we want to stay here for a little while. And so Ulmo, being the kind of person he is, he decides, okay, you can stay there, and basically sets the island there in the bay, away from Valinor, and sets it off by itself, and it is called Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Island. And that's where the Teleri live for quite a while, until eventually they decide, actually, we are going to go to Valinor. But they still want to stay close to the ocean. They don't want to go as far inland as Tirion is. So they set up their own city on the beach, with Elwë's brother Olwë, now their king. And their city on the beach is called Alqualunde. And this is a beautiful city. Now, the island, I should say, the island itself stays where it is forever. And Ulmo and Osse teach them shipbuilding, and then Osse gives them a whole bunch of swans to carry the ships across the sea because there's no wind for them. There's no wind to carry them. So that's why all the elven ships have a swan-like look to them. And so in Aqualunde, the Teleri set up residence, and they begin farming pearls and building ships and sharing their goods with their friends in Tyrion, and all is happy and wonderful. And that is how the elves get across the sea from Cuiviénen. Let's go back here. From Cuiviénen all the way up here, all the way down to the Bay of Valar, across the sea to Valinor, where they finally set up residence. And they've left many other elves along the way. Now, Tolkien does mention that it's possible that there were some Noldor and some Vanyar who fell off along the way, along the westward journey, but there weren't enough of them to actually create a whole new offset of elves. They just sort of disappeared. So we don't really hear too much about them. So that's the westward march. And that's the Teleri. And the Teleri, that's pretty much the main focus of the Teleri until later on when we start talking about the Sindar and Thingol, which will happen later on. But for now, the next bit of the story is going to focus mainly on the Noldor. So let's clear off this board here. Excuse me. Let's clear off the board and talk about the House of Finwë. These are the Noldor. And this is where we're going to get into some lineages and some names you'll have to remember. And I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible for you to remember them. So Finwë, the king of the Noldor, he has 3 sons. They're the princes of the Noldor. The first, the oldest, and the most important, the one who we're going to be talking about a lot going forward, is Feanor. Now, he is the only son that Finwë has with, let me get her name, with a woman named Miriel. There's a story behind why she was their only son, but we'll get into that later. But Finwë does eventually marry again, and has 2 other sons who are Feanor's half-brothers. The first one is Fingolfin, and then the next one is Finarfin. All 3 of these guys are going to play some role going forward. Finarfin, maybe not as prominently as Feanor or Fingolfin, but he will be mentioned quite a bit. Then we get into the sons and the children of these 3. And these are all the different princes and princesses who will also primarily be main characters in the story going forward. So Feanor, get ready for it. He's got 7 kids. The oldest and probably the most important one to remember is Maethros. As you can see him there on top. The other children are named Maglor, Celegorm, Caranthir, Curufin, Amrod, and Amras. Now, Amrod and Amras are twins. But they play roles, but they're not main characters in the story as much as some of the others. Maethros plays a very big role going forward. And then the next one, the next group that you'll probably want to remember are Celegorm and Curufin. These two brothers will play a big role in the story of Beren and Luthien later on. So, Maethros and Caligorm and Corofin. Remember those names. And then we have the children of Fingolfin. He's only got 3. Much easier to remember. But all 3 play pretty big roles like coming up. So the first is Fingon. I'm not going to say too much about what happens to him lest I spoil stuff. Next is Turgon, who is the founder and king of the hidden elven kingdom of Gondolin, which we'll get into. I'm sure that's one you've probably heard of before. And then last is the daughter, Arethel, who will become the mother of a very contentious character later on. And then, lastly, we have the children of Finarfin. There are 5 of them. We have Finrod, who will be the founder of another elven kingdom called Nargothrond, and Orodreth, Angrod, Egnor, and Galadriel. Yes, that Galadriel. And she doesn't play a huge role in the story coming forward, but she is present in it, and she's mentioned off and on throughout. But as far as like main characters go, she's probably more supporting, but it's Galadriel. You can't not mention her when she shows up. And seeing her as a young elf is pretty interesting. So these are all the different main characters in the chapters going forward. So, let me take a little cougher. So, more than anything, Feanor is the character you'll want to remember, and we'll be getting into his story in a big way in 2 weeks on the 19th when we start talking about the next really big story in the Silmarillion, or what I like to call the next trilogy, since Middle-earth stories I feel work best when broken down into trilogies. Like, we just finished the Creation trilogy. All of this has been sort of the preamble, like you know how the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy both open with big expository flashbacks. That's what this is for this trilogy, or this next upcoming trilogy, I should say. And that one is called The War of the Jewels. It sounds quite forbidding, doesn't it? Sounds quite epic. And believe me, it is epic. And so a lot of this is sort of the build up to all of that. So we have to learn all these characters. We have to know all these names because they're all going to figure prominently. So we'll just go over them quickly again. Feanor, Fingolfin, Finarfin, Maethros, Caligorm and Corofin, Fingon, Turgon, Arethel, Finrod, and lastly, Galadriel. And so that's the House of Finwë. That's, how many characters is that altogether? 10, 15, that's 20 names on that page right there. Is that, did I get that right? No, I did not. Or did I? Yes, I did. 20 names. Okay. That's 20 names on that page. Probably about, I'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of which are really worth remembering. Well, I mean, they're all worth remembering, but these are the ones who are going to figure in some way in the War of the Jewels coming up. So that's kind of it. Got through that a lot faster than I was expecting. Um, so we'll bring this back up here to where'd everything go? There it is. Uh, bring everything back here, and we can start with questions anybody might have. Let me take a sip of my coffee while everybody comes up with questions to ask. Like Temple is saying, good job on keeping it simple, Tolkien. uh, yeah, you can really tell in reading this that this is where the focus of a lot of Tolkien's writing was for pretty much most of his career. Like this is where you can really see like his dedication and his love to this. Now, I did see earlier, Light of the King had mentioned a little something about the Calaquendi and the Moraquendi, and even though they are elves of darkness, that doesn't mean that they're evil. It simply means that the Calaquendi saw the light of Amon and were embraced by that, or they embraced it, while the Moraquendi tended to dwell in darkness. Because Valinor, at the time, you have to remember, is the only place where there's any real light in the world with the trees of Valinor. Everything else is in perpetual night. Uh, Temple is asking, I don't have questions about the content, but what are you using to keep track of everything? I was thinking of keeping a notebook to make my own kind of annotated version. That's actually not a bad idea, Temple. That's actually a pretty good idea. And Suzanne is leaving. Bye, Suzanne. Um, I kept my own notes, and they're very scattershot. And like I would just basically what I would do is I would just read the chapter over and over and over and over again until it really sort of like just stayed in my brain. Ava is asking, if you were an elf, would you have traveled to Valinor or stayed in Middle-earth? You know, that's a really good question. I think I probably would have stayed. I'll be honest with you. Um, just because I like, or I may have gone with the March, but probably broken off and stayed with Lenway and become a Nandor, a wood elf. Um, that's probably where I would have done what I would have done. Light of the King is asking, I was wondering about the time frame that Tolkien had on the Silmarillion. I thought he created the Silmarillion after The Lord of the Rings of the Hobbit, or he started writing it and then put it down until later. It's interesting how these stories connect. I like the relational aspect. Um, that's a really good question, Light of the King. Um, the way I the way I can best understand it is Tolkien wrote the Silmarillion as its own self-contained mythology. This was something that he had been working on for years and years, like all through his college career, through his professorship. This was the mythology that he was building in his head, that he was basing off of the Elven language. Um, but it was and it was totally it was totally self-contained. But then when he wrote The Hobbit, he wrote that as its own unique children's story. So it actually didn't have any connection to this story in any way in the beginning. Um, and then of course The Hobbit became a hit, and the publisher wanted him to write a sequel, and so he wrote The Lord of the Rings. And in writing The Lord of the Rings, he started working in bits and pieces of this into it to sort of give it some more historical flavor. and he liked the connections that he was making so much that he went back and rewrote pieces of The Hobbit to work more smoothly with The Lord of the Rings. And then he started rewriting bits and pieces of the Silmarillion so that they would be more connected to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And so his original intention was to publish the Silmarillion after The Lord of the Rings and make this the third part of one big sweeping Middle-earth saga. But this was going to be the history behind it all, because what you get in The Lord of the Rings is a lot of references to stuff, you get a lot of intimations of things, and it's all there to sort of make the world feel real, to give it a more historical context. And the Silmarillion is where all that historical context is explained. And so that was his original intention. The publisher didn't really want to do that, and if you buy a copy of the Silmarillion, there's actually a letter in here in the beginning, a very long and very detailed letter where Tolkien outlines for his publisher who gives this huge outline for his publisher as to what the Silmarillion is, how it fits into the Lord of the Rings, and basically this is a humongous synopsis of the entire history of Middle-earth, from the Silmarillion all the way to the Lord of the Rings, and it's a fascinating read, and I would highly recommend checking that out. So I tried to do my best to keep this simple, or simpler than what Tolkien did. And what's so interesting about this book is in the Silmarillion, Tolkien writes this in the style of a Norse saga, where every sentence is very bare bones, giving you just the simple, most basic information. This person went here, they did that, this happened. And there isn't too much embellishment. There are a couple of times, especially going forward, where we'll have bits of dialogue between characters, but nothing like what we see in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, where everybody is just exchanging one huge speech after another. In this, the dialogue is kept very simple. The descriptions are kept very simple. The action itself is kept very simple. So it's a very condensed type of work, which is why I think a lot of people may see it as dry or boring, and that's simply because in one sentence there's a whole lot in there. Everything I just went over takes up 5 pages in this book. Everything I just talked about, all the journey, the different sunderings, all the different names, all the different people and places. Tolkien tells you all of that in 6 pages in this book. So that's how dense this is. That's how incredibly condensed this story is. And even the story of Thingol and Melian, which I touched on briefly this week, and we talked about a little bit more last week, that chapter is a page and a half. So there really is not a wasted sentence in this book, which is why, for me, it helps to sort of go through and read every chapter over and over and over again and try to read between the lines and try to find out what exactly is going on here. And when you do that, you realize that there is so much happening in this book that it's almost mind-boggling. What is Temple saying? In reality, Tolkien could have gone back and embellished a lot of those short descriptions into entire short stories and novels. And it's true, and he did. There is The Children of Húrin, which of course is based on the is an expansion of the story of Turin Turambar, which we'll get into much later. But there's also The Unfinished Tales, which is a collection of stories that also expands on a lot of what's in here. Um, and then, of course, there is the 12-volume history of Middle-earth. Which is it's the history of Middle-earth is more than just stories that help to explain all the stuff that happens in the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings. It actually goes more into Tolkien's creative process by showing earlier drafts of stuff. So I would say the History of Middle-earth book series, which is 12 volumes, by the way, is actually more of a behind the scenes. What is Light of the King asking here? Where are you finding the photos of the Valar? I'm doing Google searches and pretty much and sort of finding the ones that best suit the image that I'm trying to convey with this presentation, because there are certain characters, and I discovered this when I was doing my image searching. There are certain characters that figure prominently in key scenes later on, and a lot of the illustrations that I was finding of these characters were of those key scenes, and they were very spoilery. Now, I've already read the book, so I already know what's happening, so it wasn't a spoiler for me. But, I didn't want to, have an image of Fingolfin in one of his climactic battle scenes. I didn't want to have an image of Maethros when he goes through his ordeals. I didn't want to have those illustrations spoiling something for you, because if you're reading along with me, if you're reading along with the show, I want you to be able to enjoy it as we go and not be spoiled by things. So even though the book is quite old, it's been out since when did it first come out? Like late 70s, I think. 77. The year I was born. It's as old as me. Um, Even though this book has been out for nearly 40 years, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, or that you shouldn't be able to enjoy it without spoilers. So I tried to keep that as best under wraps. So I would recommend that if you're doing that, don't do any Google image searching for characters like Fingolfin or Maethros, because the first stuff that comes up will be spoilers. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about. That actually went by a lot faster than I was expecting it to, because I swear to God, I've been working on this for a whole week, and I was tweaking this presentation up until literally about an hour before the show started. And as you can see, there were still little quirks in it that I hadn't quite worked out. But next week, we'll be talking Middle-earth Madness with a bunch of the contributors to the book. So join us for that. And then the week after that, Suzanne will be joining us again as we get into the War of the Jewels. And it's going to be actiony, it's going to be dramatic. Everything we just went through will be worth it. And that's the best thing I can say. Everything that we discussed, while it may seem dry and it may seem like too much information and your brain's going to explode from all of it, it's all necessary information, and it's all going to pay off. I promise you. Uh, Light of the King is saying it was good to stay focused and not get distracted by the chat. I think that helped with streamlining everything. That's a very good point, Light of the King. I do tend to get distracted by the chat, and so I made it a point that I was going to take the chat out, even though it was still up on the screen the whole time and I could still see it on my end. I was really making a point not to look at it. Um, but that's pretty much where we're gonna leave it for this week. Um, Amazing! I got the whole thing done in right in an hour. Um, I was expecting it to take an hour and a half, but the information is there for you. This will be on YouTube for you to watch again. Maybe take some more notes. Maybe try to figure stuff out that you might have missed before. If you got a copy of the Silmarillion, read the chapter. I would say read it a couple of times. Of Eldamar and the princes of the Eldalië. And also, for the record, the term Eldalië is the name of the host of elves that leave Cuivianen and go to Valinor. That's what the Valar call them. And yeah, I would recommend just like sink your teeth into it. It really is worth doing that. It really is worth like taking a chapter, reading it a few times, and seeing just everything you can get out of it. I highly recommend that. I've been getting a lot out of this book just by rereading a chapter at a time. And I think that it would behoove you to do the same thing. What's Temple saying here? Maybe when we are all done, we can create an annotated edit and encourage the publisher to publish it. We need an annotated Silmarillion far more than the annotated Hobbit. You know what? I would say it needs more than an annotated version. I would say that because people have published readers' guides to the Lord of the Rings, because if you were to do an annotation to the Silmarillion, it would pretty much double its size, if not more. So my recommendation would be maybe putting together a reader's guide to the Silmarillion. And who knows? Maybe I'll do something like that later on. And so yeah. Next week, Middle-earth Madness, not to be confused with Middle-earth March Madness, which is ending fairly soon. Over at theonering.net, we're down to our final 4. I believe the two competitors are Eru Iluvatar versus Bilbo Baggins, and Gandalf versus Hurin. And so you can go to the One Ring and vote for who you think should win in those competitions, and then it will come down to the final battle between whoever wins these two. And that's Middle-earth March Madness, which is not the same as Middle-earth Madness, which is a book. But we'll be discussing Middle-earth Madness next week. And then the week after that, we begin the War of the Jewels. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be action-packed. I'm looking forward to it. And you should be too. So yeah. So I will see you all next week, hopefully with some guests for Middle-earth Madness. Have a happy Easter, everybody. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who did, I will see you then, and never stop reading.